there's no question that classical music and jazz are both starting to lose their mainstream audiences. It's happened for quite a while by now, let's acknowledge. Maybe Stravinsky's Rite of Spring was the last time that a truly revolutionary piece was also a truly popular piece, although as late as mid-century, Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra makes it pretty big, although Bartók himself dies in poverty. And so if it takes classical art music a couple hundred years to run out of favor with the general public. And what is that general public anyway? You know, when you go back to the time of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, that general public would have been an upper class. And now we have the populace at large. And so in a sense, we want to get down to some very basic musical values. And there's no question that jazz runs things in the 1920s and 30s, and even into the 40s. The turning point is the demise of the big bands. Big bands were able to survive if they had someone singing into a mic gently, the crooners, people like Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, or the bands got smaller. But many of those smaller bands get abstruse, as in bebop, which is wonderful art, but like the avant-garde classical, its own avant-garde, it does not maintain a mainstream, very large audience. So what's the solution? The rhythm section of the jazz bands, fronted by a singer, but hardly crooning, but using that mic, but in a much more aggressive stance, is taking over. Initially called rhythm and blues. Forgot Lucas Foss, but also Big Joe Turner with his Rollin' Pete all the way back in 1939. And arguably you could consider that a proto-rock and roll song. Rock and roll, initially the boats on the water, then the gyrations in an African-American church, and then the gyrations, later at night, shall we say. And indeed, jazz basically means the same thing. Hey, baby, you want a jazz, etc., etc. So this term rock and roll starts to get used more and more. Alan Freed in 1951 popularized the term on the radio, but it's an evolution. People like Bill Haley and the Comets get it. Songs with the lyric rock and roll in them. 12-bar blues usually. The dichotomy between art music and popular music by this period is easily as greater than probably the sacred secular split that we found in the Renaissance. So a lot of things have happened by this point. We've only touched a little bit on it with the hints of rhythm and blues with T-Bone Walker and Muddy Waters, neither of whom we had in particularly up-tempo songs. By the time we get to Chuck Berry, we're already in the middle of it. Indeed, Elvis Presley, who's a younger person and not particularly a composer, but certainly an influential, shall we say, stylist, comes to the fore. Bill Haley was actually coming from like a country tradition, rockabilly, combined the African-American side of rhythm and blues with the rockabilly side of those European Americans, and voila, rock and roll. Early on, one Colonel Parker said, if I could find a white man who sings like a black man, I'll make millions. And that would, of course, be Elvis Presley. Well, in some ways, here's the tide turning, because it was said that Chuck Berry was kind of a black man singing like a white man, and singing about typical cross-ethnic concerns like fast cars and fast women in Maybelline, which once again is a 12-bar blues, but it has a verse section that is just on the one chord, and each time the one is elucidated by a bass line of, which is also in country music. And it's a lot of musical comedies, too. I failed to mention, in, of all things, the Do-Re-Mi song from The Sound of Music has the same oompa oompa. Kurt Weill, in Three Penny Opera and some of his later works when he came to America and became a Broadway composer, feature similar ideas. The end of the Chuck Berry song from his famous duck-walking guitar solos. It's over 3 choruses of the 12-bar blues. And then back to the actual vocal chorus, one of the verses, and then the final with the same signature lick motif. Start of the piece at the end.
Why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? Now, you started back doing the things you used to do. Now, the motor cooled down, the heat went down, that's when I heard that highway sound. Cadillac set like a ton of lead, 110, half a mile ahead. Cadillac looked like setting still, and I caught Maybelline at the top of the hill. Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, can't you be true? You started back doing the things you used to do.
Following that, just the intro of John Coltrane's seminal piece, Alabama. What are the chord changes? C. Yeah, but what are the chord changes? Just C. Okay, go somewhere else later. But really, it actually touches base with Indian classical music, and that's going to be another door into other interesting matters. Bach, Beethoven, Stravinsky, Miles Davis, composers that go through three distinct artistic periods. In Miles Davis's case, he starts as a bebop player with Charlie Parker, who we only heard in consort with his good buddy Dizzy Gillespie back there at Sure Enough. But sure enough, this guy moved beyond bebop to cool jazz and does many important recordings, and then discovers that the rock and rollers are making tons more money by doing arena shows, and he realizes that he can make more money in one night doing an arena show than a whole month's worth of club dates. So he makes the change. And his change is a drummer doing straight beats rather than the swing beats. You'll hear the subdivisions are in 4. He's still doing the swing on his trumpet. His trumpet playing is as abstract as Thelonious Monk. And he's got an electric keyboard that reflects really 70s rock by this point, late 60s. In his album Bitches Brew, rather controversial at the time, here's a live version of Miles Runs the Voodoo Down. Miles once got arrested outside a club where he was the headliner. There's no question that experiences like that give an angry edge to what he's got going, and rightly so. And of course, music is perfect to express such anger, whether you're in the club or maybe on a TV show. Here's the ongoing legacy of Star Trek whispering down the lane with different composers. By the way, that theme song from Star Trek is best known in an orchestration redone by Fred Steiner. No relation to our old friend Max Steiner. Now here is Gerald Fried with some signature music from a second-year Star Trek episode, Amok Time, and this has become kind of the quintessential foreign planet battle music to this day, often parodied. And we'll hear much later Stephen Clark base an entire opera on this Star Trek episode.